Hello and welcome to this, which is the 13th panel in our roadmap series, Discussions for the Future of Poultry, People and Planet. So these fortnightly discussions are addressing key issues for sustainable development from the perspective of nutrition security and the global poultry industry. And today we're returning to our theme of food systems to explore the shifting role of poultry in agriculture and diets, how poultry has fed into different food systems throughout history and what lessons does this offer for the 21st century. So a few usual housekeeping notes. The discussion will last for 1 hour. The event is being recorded and will be available on the One Health Poultry website in a day or so's time. Please put your questions to the panel through the Zoom Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to vote for the questions that you think are particularly important. And if English is not your first language, don't let this stop you from putting questions in. I'll ask as many of your questions as possible to our panelists, and if your question is covered by a previous answer or we run out of time, please do accept my apologies. We do have an online discussion channel that you can access from the website and from your registration link. Do explore this to share questions, comments, thoughts, etc. And these discussions will contribute along with the live discussions, to a series of briefing notes we're preparing from the series. So first, before we start today's discussion, we'd welcome your thoughts from our first poll, which is just appearing on your screens now. It will disappear when you vote. So we're asking you to go for your best option here. About people have been raising poultry for thousands of years, but since the 1950s, there's been significant changes to how poultry are produced. So today in your country, poultry production systems are best described as, and then there's a number of options. So please vote for the option that you prefer. Okay, so I'm now delighted to welcome our panelists for today. Just put our cameras on. Lovely, thank you. So welcome to Dr. Bharati Kulkarni, who's from the ICMR National Institute of Nutrition in Hyderabad, India. Welcome. And to Dr. Joanna Wong, who's from ZEBI, which is Support Evidence-Based Interventions in Livestock at the University of Edinburgh. So each of you has got 10 minutes to present your thoughts, and we'll give you a signal at about 9 minutes to let you know that you've got a minute to wrap up. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Bharati, who's going to give the first talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I consider it my privilege and honor to be speaking at the roadmap series of the One Health Poultry Hub. I would be speaking mainly about the role of poultry products in diets and nutritional status of vulnerable groups in the low and middle income countries. There is ample evidence available that poultry products, especially eggs, have an important role in child nutrition. For example, a cross-sectional study from Maharashtra state in India showed that low consumption of eggs was associated with almost twofold increase in odds of child stunting. Another important randomized control trial from Ecuador on egg supplementation, where one egg was given every day for 6 months, starting at 6 to 9 months of age, showed that stunting prevalence reduced by almost 47% and underweight prevalence reduced by 74% within such a short span. In the same study, there were significant effects seen on neurocognitive markers such as choline and DHA, that is docosahexaenoic acid, which is an important neurocognitive marker. Another study from Uganda, which was a randomized control trial in school children, also showed that children receiving 2 eggs per day in school feeding program for a period of 6 months had greater increase in height, weight, and muscle mass compared to children who received fewer or no eggs. these important benefits on child nutrition are because of the unique nutrient composition of the eggs. Eggs are a rich source of high quality protein, providing indispensable amino acids, which stimulate IGF-1, that is insulin-like growth factor 1, which stimulates linear growth. Eggs also are a source of essential fatty acids, including the DHA, and choline, which is a precursor of sphingomyelin, which is important for brain development and cognition. Now, based on this evidence, as a part of Action Against Stunting Hub, we are also planning to conduct a study in India to provide egg supplementation starting at 6 months of age and to continue for 1 year to look at the impact on not only reduction of stunting and improvement of cognition, but also a range of other parameters, including neurocognitive markers, epigenetic, as well as microbiome profile of these children. Eggs are also important as a part of nutrition supplementation programs in LMICs because the cost is lower than other meats. They're easy to transport, clean, and cook, and they have low environmental impact compared to other animal source foods. There's also ecological evidence that animal source food intake are important for reducing childhood stunting. For example, when we look at the countries where animal source food intake is very low, we can see that the prevalence of stunting is high. Whereas in case of countries where animal source food intake is high, the prevalence of stunting is lower. Animal source foods are important not only for improving linear growth in children, because of their unique nutrient composition and nutrient density. Linear growth in children increases the likelihood of higher lean body mass in adults, which is responsible for reducing obesity. Animal source foods also have nutritional benefits in terms of improving satiety, reducing calorie intake, and maintaining optimal body weight in case of adults. There are a number of studies which have shown positive influence of animal source foods on muscle mass throughout life due to the anabolic properties of dietary proteins. Higher intakes of animal proteins are associated with reduced loss of lean mass in follow-up studies in elderly women. Especially the folic acid in the poultry meat and eggs is important during pregnancy for reducing the risk of congenital neurodeficit. Increasing an egg intake during pregnancy has important benefits for the birth outcomes, including reducing the risk of low birth weight. Studies have also shown that higher egg intake in lactating women improves the nutrient content of the breast milk. Egg yolk are high in cholesterol, so there is also a concern about relationship between egg intake and how it impacts whether it impacts lipid profiles adversely. But many of these studies have been inconclusive, probably because of the smaller sample size. However, a meta-analysis showed that high egg consumption increased the levels of total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, which have negative consequences for cardiac health, but at the same time, HDL cholesterol, which is considered to be a positive factor. A recent study in China, however, showed that consuming more than 6 eggs per week increased the risk of all-cause mortality, especially in people who had high BMI. Therefore, similar to other dietary guidelines, it's important to remember that even all animal source foods, including eggs, will have nutritional benefits if they are consumed in moderation. Poultry sector has seen a number of structural changes during the past 2 decades, and therefore there has been substantial increase in production. But unfortunately, production and consumption do not go hand in hand in low and middle income countries, and India is a glaring example. India is the third largest producer of eggs in the world. However, when we look at egg consumption in India, it's quite low. There is a disparity between availability and consumption, and there is inequitable access. And this is partly because despite increased production, I'm talking in the context of India, as an example. Despite increased production, there's no cost reduction. You can see the brown line, the cost of eggs, fish, and meat have been increasing over the years despite substantial increase in production. Therefore, there is a disparity and inequitable access, especially for the poor socioeconomic group, rural as compared to the urban population. Age and gender dynamics also play a role. Women and young children are at a disadvantage, and older adults and men get a preferential access to animal source foods. The recent comprehensive National Nutrition Survey data has shown that in case of 6 to 23-month-old children, the proportion of children receiving minimum acceptable diet in terms of minimum dietary diversity and minimum meal frequency was just meager 6%. And this is the biggest contributor to high prevalence of undernutrition and stunting in case of young children. Because of the nutritional importance of eggs, many states in India have now started including eggs in the social protection programs, which provide nutrition supplementation in India. But the efforts are still need to be strengthened. And I believe that inclusion of animal source food and especially poultry products would go a long way in reducing undernutrition in the vulnerable groups in the low and middle income countries like India. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bharati. That's a really great start to today's panel. So for people in the audience, if you've been stimulated by Bharati's talk, do please post your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll have the questions after the second talk. For now, thank you, Bharati. I think the results of the first poll are in, so can we please have a little look at that? And so you were asked about how to describe poultry production systems in your own country. And so 49% of you say that it's mostly commercial production with some traditional backyard. And then in some countries, clearly 31% of people, it's almost entirely intensive. And quite a small proportion, 11%, are saying that it's mostly backyard. And in 7% of respondents, that most of the poultry products are imported. Interesting, we've got an audience that comes from quite a broad geographical spread, so it's clear that the systems are very variable between countries, which I think is pretty clear. Thank you very much for that. I'm now going to call on Joanna to deliver her talk. Joanna, welcome.
Thank you, Fiona. Okay, thank you for the invitation to speak today as a panel member. Just to give everyone a bit of a background, I'm a veterinarian and I currently consult for Sebi Livestock, and I've been working in the area of livestock contributions to food and nutrition security for a number of years, with a particular interest in chickens. So that the poll results actually seg straight into my discussion of different poultry systems and how far we've come. So domestication of chickens happened thousands of years ago, and it's only relatively recently that intensive production systems have come about. So traditionally, poultry have tended to be raised in extensive and low input systems, and these systems still predominate in many low and middle income countries. What we see in these systems is that there are minimal inputs required, and so it makes it a very accessible form of livestock for many people, including women, and it can be one of the only one of the only species of livestock that women can actually raise. So these are some pictures from Timor-Leste, where I did some field work, and chickens there generally tend to roost in trees or in very simple baskets that are made from local materials. And these chickens form part of the household's livelihood strategy. So they are a living bank, and they make small contributions to income and household food security. The nutrition profile of traditionally raised chickens and eggs seems to be fairly similar to the commercially produced chickens and eggs, even though they tend to be smaller. So actually, their concentration of nutrients is sometimes higher. There is high local demand because of their taste. They're much tastier than commercially produced chickens, and they're often incorporated into local cultural ceremonies. In these systems, when chickens are utilized, the whole carcass is consumed, so including nutrient-rich organs such as the liver or the kidneys. And they usually fetch a higher price at market than commercially available products. They also provide some ecosystem services, such as producing manure for crop fertilization and as pest control for other livestock species. So these systems do still exist, and they contribute a lot to households. However, what we're seeing, if we look back through time, is that the population of chickens has grown significantly in some places, but also shrunk in some other places. If we look at productivity, however, the picture is a little bit different. There's just continued growth all over the world with concentrations in certain areas. So the drivers for these the growth in chicken production, our growth in human population, household incomes, and urbanization, and the convenience that it is that you can produce a lot of food for a lot of people at a relatively low cost. The population of populations have only slightly increased, but productivity has increased massively due to intensification. And as we saw from the poll, a lot of countries really rely on intensive production of poultry products to produce enough food. As we heard from Bharati, animal source foods, including poultry, play a really important part in nutrition security, especially where nutrient availability and access is limited. So because of because of the changes that are projected for low and middle income countries, the demand for animal source food is projected to continue to increase. And when you look at different countries' livestock plans and policies, the intensification of poultry is often the selected pathway for massive increases in production. So a lot of these policies aim to target pre-commercial farmers to intensify production by moving into highly intensive systems, and also by moving traditional scavenging poultry systems to what they call semi-improved systems, where introduction of exotic breeds and improved management systems are introduced. So much of the world does use intensive poultry production, and it is seeming to become, it's the pathway along which we are going for much of the rest of the world. And I guess the positives of intensive production is that, you do have optimization of production. So everything is calculated so that you get efficient growth of the chickens, and you have economies of scale. You also have a reliable supply of poultry products, so they can supply the supermarkets, and there's always product available for consumers. The massive increases in production have decreased the cost of chicken meat and eggs to consumers. So in high-income countries, they are one of the least costly forms of high-quality protein that is accessible, other than processed meats. So the demand continues to be high, partly because of health concerns. So the push towards white meat over red meat because of the health concerns associated with red meats, also because of the price, but also now there is growing awareness of environmental issues. So chicken production chicken and egg production is one of the least greenhouse gas emissions intense of all the livestock products, and people are starting to think about these things as they make their food choices. They also produce very high profit margins for producers. But if we look at some of the disadvantages and externalities, because they require such high capital and such a lot of inputs, it does restrict the number of producers to those who can provide that. So it becomes a less accessible form of livestock for most of the population. To achieve high levels of production, human edible foods are used. So grains that could be used to feed people are being diverted to poultry. And also, more land is cleared to be able to produce crops for feeding to our poultry, intensively produced poultry. We have globalization of a small number of genetic strains. So those strains that have been identified to be highly productive and to cope well under these intensive systems, these get shipped around the world in the form of, parent stock or day-old chicks. This massive network and the concentration and crowding of animals into these, these small spaces, relatively small, increases the risk of infectious disease and zoonoses. And even just recently in the COVID crisis, here in Scotland, poultry farms were one of the first places to close because of outbreak of COVID in the humans because of the conditions, favorable conditions for disease spread. There are also animal welfare concerns. So we have really pushed these chickens to be highly productive, and their muscular growth often outstrips their skeletal growth, or they might be housed in quite confined spaces. And where planning hasn't really caught up with the development process, there might be poor waste disposal. So you might have spreading of waste, which leads to runoff into river systems, or you might have air pollution in the form of ammonia. And also, I guess this is a question mark because I don't actually know the percentage of women that own or manage or directly benefit from the high incomes that are produced in these commercial systems. But certainly, I think that the opportunities to have enough capital are much lower. So there are also disadvantages to extensive systems. You do have low production rates and high mortality, limited access to healthcare, shelter, and nutrition, and the instability of flock sizes can lead to risky consumption behaviors, such as consuming, sick chickens that you wouldn't otherwise if you had the option. And the shared living quarters with humans and livestock can also increase exposure to pathogens. So there's quite a large transition between these extensive systems and commercial systems, and a lot of systems need to be in place. So to be able to transition farmers into these more intensive systems, they need access to genetic materials and feeds and health inputs, but you also need these regulatory systems to ensure that high quality feeds are used. Commercial production increases competition for local farmers, and there is increased convenience, but there's also loss of nutrients. This is just a little heat map that I want to finish with, showing that in a commercially produced chicken, generally only the meat and the skeleton is sold, and you have loss of all the organs, which are the most rich sources for vitamins and minerals such as iron, vitamin B12, and vitamin A. So I'm going to leave this with questions to open the discussion, which, is intensification the best way forward? Are we happy to accept all the externalities in order to push food production, but also economic growth? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for that perspective. Really great and nice to see some questions at the end. Okay, so we'll open up the discussion in a moment. Bharati, do you want to put your camera back on? Lovely. I've got a question for both of you first, because you've both mentioned, you know, the balance, if you like, the fact that the pluses and minuses in terms of the nutritional content and the other aspects of the different systems. And I think, you know, in lots of lower middle income countries, governments and donors are putting quite a lot of emphasis on commercialization and development of more intense systems. Do you think this is the right way to go? What about the balance in terms of how much support is there in different countries for supporting local production and stakeholder production? And how does that fit into what Bharati talked about in terms of equitable access to high quality food? Can you both give a perspective on that? Bharati, would you like to go first on that?
Yeah, sure. I think commercialization of poultry production, as Joanna mentioned, has a number of externalities, and people are concerned about environmental impact. And there is also inequitable access, because that's what we have been seeing in India. Despite increase in production, access is limited for the vulnerable groups. Whereas a number of non-governmental organizations and also some government, through some government efforts, there is encouragement for backyard poultry encouragement, and many of these interventions are focused on rural women, and there are some initiatives such as Swabhiman program, which is ongoing in some of the poorer states in India, where it has been seen that backyard poultry production offers livelihoods to rural women. At the same time, it provides an easy access to poultry products. And when women are involved in poultry production, they have more control, and there is more likelihood that it will be used for the nutritional needs of the family. Whereas if it's controlled by men, it's mostly for selling, because many of our agriculture nutrition linkage study have found that whenever there is higher production, people tend to sell it rather than consume it at home. So probably a backyard poultry would pave way towards more equitable access for women and children. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Joanna?
Yeah, I think that you know, a lot of the times the focus of governments and for big donors, you know, they're trying to lift people out of poverty, and they're trying to maximize food availability for supposedly for nutrition and food security. But a lot of these problems that Bharati's just mentioned, you know, exist. The income that is made is big, and it does look impressive on paper. However, it's not equitably distributed. And when you increase, you intensify production, it does change the beneficiary. So I don't know if the push towards intensification is actually enabling governments and donors to reach their goals, or maybe the better question is, you know, what is their goal? If the goal is to improve food and nutrition security for the most vulnerable, then I suspect that that's not the way to go. Generally, there tends to be less support for smaller systems, so backyard systems, where it's harder to demonstrate that you've made an impact, because you're probably impacting multiple areas of the livelihood, not just income. So I think it comes back down to the targets that they're setting for what they want to achieve, and ticking that target, but not necessarily having the change that they want. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's some other questions coming through on this topic, which we'll get to in a moment, I think. But I'm going to turn first to the most upvoted question that we have so far, which is from Helen Lambert, and she's asking specifically Bharati, but I think you can both have a crack at it if you want, asking you to comment on the role of vegetarianism, which includes eggs, so ovo-lacto-vegetarianism. How does that complicate the picture that you presented in India? So is food supplementation only relevant to lower caste or non-vegetarian populations?
Yeah, I think this is a very valid question, and it's a common belief that vegetarianism is a big issue in India. But when we see the data from National Family Health Survey and other sources, 2/3 of the people consider themselves non-vegetarian. So that means they culturally it's acceptable for them to consume eggs and meat. And many times the people who are most underprivileged and most vulnerable, vegetarianism is not a big concern for them. It's lack of access because of economic and physical reasons. So that's a problem. Vegetarianism is more for the upper caste, and and usually they are not the people who have the problem. They are not the most vulnerable people. So it complicates, especially in many communities. Women of reproductive age and adolescent girls tend to have taboos against or cultural prohibitions for consuming eggs. But the answer to it is social marketing uh, and also creating awareness about the importance, because there are a number of beliefs which are not exactly religious or cultural reasons. Because, for example, in our region, egg yolk is not given to a small child. It's only the egg white, and they are missing out on important part. So there is no religious angle here. It's just there are some misconceptions. So I think awareness is also equally important. Thank you.
Thank you, Bharati. You've kind of almost answered one of the other questions from Prakash Kurunga, which was linked, which he was asking about how to overcome religious taboos associated with eating eggs in India. So do you want to just quickly finish up that one, and then we'll hand over to Joanna?
Yeah, so I think what we are seeing is increasing income is one of the biggest drivers of increasing consumption of animal source foods, including eggs. And as rural areas are getting urbanized, and there are people living in metropolitan areas, these cultural and religious barriers are becoming less and less. And also it's important that people are aware of the importance of eggs and poultry products for nutrition. And I would like to emphasize that it's more important for pregnant women, lactating women, young children, and less so for the elderly, where the concerns related to high cholesterol and its association with cardiac problems is there. But many times it's believed that even small children should not consume egg yolk because it has high cholesterol, whereas it's necessary for their brain development and cognition, and it's also necessary for their linear growth. But people sometimes, because of sort of missed priorities, people tend to think that even for small children, reducing cholesterol intake is important. So I think creating awareness is the answer to it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Joanna, anything quickly to add on other cultures and eggs and vegetarianism?
Not too much, just that from working in Timor-Leste, it's not generally a choice to be vegetarian. When I spoke to people in villages, they said that really there's only a small handful of people who don't eat meat, and that's because they're not used to the flavor, because they didn't receive it enough when they were younger. So most of the time it's the lack of opportunity rather than a dietary choice.
Okay, thank you. Got a question here from Melanie Hay, which is about, she says, you mentioned infectious disease and zoonosis risk in commercial farms. However, extensive or backyard poultry production is sometimes associated with higher public health risks in terms of zoonotic transmission. Do you think commercial systems manage risks better through improved biosecurity and healthcare? Joanna, can I come to you first on that?
Yeah, look, I think that every system has its risks, and there certainly are public health concerns in extensive poultry systems. However, those risks tend to be quite contained. So you have small numbers of poultry that they're not cooped up together. They're not, in each other's space, even though they are sometimes sharing space with humans. And it's generally if an outbreak occurs, you're talking about relatively small scale. So yes, there are risks. in the commercial system, what we're seeing is, large numbers of birds that are all the same age. So they tend to all move through the production system together. And if there is a disease that occurs, it affects the entire, age group. And we also see that globalization, so the movement of poultry inputs between different countries and different networks really can aid the spread of zoonoses and infectious agents. So there is better management. I think that there are different risks for each system, but when you have a problem in a commercial system, you have a big problem. You need to cull thousands of birds, if not millions. And so the scale of the disaster is a little bit different.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here from Azizul Islam, which is about the nutritional composition of eggs being dependent on the diet of the chicken. So how can we maintain a standard composition in different types of eggs, depending on whether they've come from intensive or scavenging poultry? Bharati, do you want to mention that? You talked about nutritional composition.
Yeah, I think nutrition composition can be changed through the feeds, but then how to make it standard or something, I think that's more into the area of poultry production. I don't think I'll be able to.
Okay, Joanna,
Yeah, I can comment on that. So in a lot of extensive systems, chickens choose their own feed. So there is sometimes a problem with undernutrition, but they also have access to a great variety, and they're out there eating the slugs and the bugs that we wouldn't dream of eating. That range of nutrients does still it does go into the eggs that they produce. And there are actually a small number of studies. The most recent one that I can think of from 2019 compared the nutrient content of eggs from a backyard system to a commercial system and found that they were very similar. Despite the traditional egg being smaller, it was more concentrated in nutrients. And some nutrients were higher in the backyard system and some nutrients were higher in the commercial system, but actually overall they were very similar. So I don't think we need to worry so much about the nutritional content of the egg, because every egg has enough nutrition to grow a chicken. But certainly there are changes between the nutritional composition of chicken meat or the chicken products available when you're talking about the whole chicken.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, a question here from Sophie Hedges about what role could poultry foods play in alleviating the double burden of malnutrition in developing countries? Bharati.
Yeah, I think animal source foods, including poultry foods, will have an important role in alleviating double burden of malnutrition in low and middle income countries that are undergoing nutrition transition. When we call double burden, it's coexistence of undernutrition in children and adiposity and obesity in older members in the family, either in the same community or in the same family. So higher consumption of eggs and poultry foods during childhood will increase the linear growth of children. And when children grow taller, they tend to have a higher muscle mass. And when they have a higher muscle mass, they have a higher resting metabolic expenditure, which is influencing reducing adiposity. And many times people who have low muscle mass tend to be less physically active. So higher muscle mass is also related to increasing physical activity, and this helps in reducing obesity in adulthood. So, and also animal source food intake during adulthood has a role in maintaining muscle mass. And actually the double burden of malnutrition, that is coexistence of undernutrition and overnutrition, is linked with low muscle mass, and which is very commonly seen in especially people from the South Asian subcontinent. So because of its important role in maternal and child nutrition, it will have influence on the nutrition throughout the life course, and therefore it will reduce the double burden of malnutrition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got several questions about antibiotics and antimicrobial resistance, which we can roll together a little bit. So there was one question from, I'm just trying to find it. From Asa Doron asking, how can you blanch the environmental pollution and AMR factory farming in India with what's described as a need for more protein? So that's a sort of balancing question. Rajini Peter asks about risks associated with antibiotic overuse. And Julie Bettridge has a slightly longer question, which is saying that you can argue that commercial farms in Europe went through a transition phase where they were really reliant on antimicrobials as growth promoters before reaching current high standards of biosecurity, which have allowed antimicrobial use to be reduced, is now reducing. So the question that she's posing is, what do you think the trajectory will look like in India or other growing economies, given the current push for better antimicrobial stewardship? So can we kind of address the whole issue of where are we on the pathway to reduction of antimicrobial usage in low and middle income countries?
Yeah. I think that what probably did happen in higher income countries and what may happen in low and middle income countries is that the growth in production really outstrips a lot of the other kind of mechanisms. So if you don't have simultaneous improvements in hygiene, sanitation, other methods to support the birds as they're taken, put into these kind of quite unnatural situations, then there will be a reliance on drugs, whether whether stated or not, that will help support these birds' immunity. So I think that unless that there are changes in the way that commercial systems arise and they develop, there's likely to be a continued problem. Even in high income countries, it's taken us a long time, and with the problem has been created before we are aware, and we still don't have the best solutions for that in our current systems, I think.
Okay, thank you. Bharati, do you have a view on this, and maybe on the need for One Health, which is where we would probably put the emphasis?
Yeah, I think antimicrobial resistance is an important issue regarding not only for poultry production, but for human health as well, because we have been seeing a sort of abuse or overuse of antibiotics, and people, I think there is also another component to it, that people are afraid of eating animal source foods because of these perceived risks, which are really which are real risks. So antimicrobial resistance is a broad problem which affects poultry as well as human health, and we really need to have a One Health approach to move further on this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to move away from this a little bit. We've had a question from Nitish Devnath about would you agree poultry products in human diets in the near future would become like any other stable food, like rice or wheat? Or is that an overambitious goal? Chicken becomes just like taking the wheat off the shelf or the flour off the shelf. How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's not only overambitious, but it's not the right goal, because for human health, we require a diverse diet, which needs to have foods from different food groups. So it's never going to replace the staple food grains, but then they are equally essential as much as fruits and vegetables and dairy products and millets, as well as cereal grains, as well as legumes. So they should be a part of a diverse diet rather than replacing any other food. So, thank you.
Thank you, Joanna.
I think if you look at the diets of people in high income countries, it is almost a staple. The chickens and eggs are so cheap, and they're tasty, and we get good health messages about them. And so they are consumed probably, I think, more regularly than any other meat. So, it's not a staple, but it is a consistent feature of our diets. And if you look at the the nutritional inadequacies in high-income countries, we do have women, a large proportion of women of reproductive age with low iron, and you do need a balanced diet and a mix of different foods to be able to achieve your nutritional goals. And I do worry about the diets that are heavily based on meat, and particularly chicken, in high-income countries where overconsumption is a problem.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions here about externalities. So Joanna, this is a question, this one is from Nadaraja Shushkanaraja. Apologies for the pronunciation. So Joanna, your list of externalities did not include the global impact of larger scale clearing of forested areas for growing poultry feed resources to support increasing demand from intensive poultry systems. Any comments? And we have a similar question from Ivo Syndicus, who says poultry is often presented as the animal source protein with the least environmental impact. But does this really hold when we consider the externalities of the reliance of commercial poultry systems on soy-based feed cultivated on land for which the Amazon is deforested, for example? So can we have a little discussion about nutritional, about fodder, really, the environmental impact of growing food for chickens?
Yeah, it is I did actually mention land clearance for feed, but not in the list of externalities. You're right, but it's a huge concern to be able to produce chicken on such a massive scale. We do need high quality foods, and often these feeds or foods are grains and cereals that humans can eat. So we really need to question whether we're doing the right thing by clearing large masses of land to be able to plant feed that goes into chickens that could be directly consumed by humans. And it's not the most efficient way of managing our food resources. So, I think that there is a question of, what is the end point, or what is the goal of commercial production? Is it, when do we draw the line to say, okay, we're producing enough, we don't need to maximize production anymore or produce anymore because of the environmental factors? And I think that this is where a One Health approach really does need to be taken, because we've gotten to this point so far through only looking at numbers of productivity, so numbers of chickens produced, numbers of eggs produced, and the amount of people that can feed, and the amount of money that we can either save through making everything work efficiently, but also reducing cost. That they all come at a cost, but these are not tend to be considered, or they haven't been considered very well to date. But now that we have this knowledge, how can we use this knowledge to better direct future growth? And yeah, that's also my question. So I don't have any good answers for you, but it is a major concern.
Thank you. Bharati, do you want to comment on that or not? It's a little removed from your area.
It's difficult question to answer for anyone, and as we are going ahead, I think it's the One Health approach which we need to adopt. So that's all I'd say.
Okay, thank you. It's a very open question here from Pankaj Dar. What production systems are best for animal welfare? Quick answer for that one, please.
I think, if you think about the criteria for assessing animal welfare, one of the biggest ones is the ability for animals to perform their natural behaviors. And when you look at intensive systems, I think the ability for them to do that is rather limited. So on the flip side, in extensive systems, that they do sometimes have issues with access to adequate feed and water. So I think, on balance, if we're producing food, chickens, that are reared without the space to do their normal things, and where their muscular growth for broilers is often so rapid and so extreme that they have skeletal problems as a result, I don't think these things are good for animal welfare. And I think that the general public is becoming more aware of these issues, and there's been a push for free-range products. But we need to really examine the definitions of these terms and what they mean for us as consumers and what we're okay with in terms of the animal welfare of food, the animals in our food production systems.
Okay, thank you. It's a difficult one, I agree.
Mm.
There's a question here, Bharati, for you from Lavinia Scudiero, which is, to what extent is consumers' health risk perception playing a role in poultry demand in low and middle income countries? So you did touch on this a little bit, on what consumers think.
It plays a lesser role in low and middle income countries compared to high income countries. The primary factor which drives consumption of animal source foods is the cost of these foods and the income of the person. So I would say that people do have these risk perceptions, but that's not the driving factor. It's the cost and the income of the person.
Joanna, you got a view on that from your experience in low and middle income countries?
Sorry, I was looking at the questions in the chat. I missed that.
How much does consumer perception of risk play into people's purchasing, I guess?
Yeah, I think in low and middle income countries, the benefit derived from consuming the chicken or the egg really trumps a lot of the perception of risk, except when you're talking about the difference between extensively produced poultry and commercial poultry. Sometimes there is distrust of commercial poultry because they hear stories through social media about how that chicken is produced and problems that are associated with those chickens. I think in high income countries, the risk perception is does impact buying behavior. So if we hear about an outbreak of salmonella in a particular production unit and everything is recalled, that really sparks kind of fear and distrust in the public. It does probably alter buying habits temporarily.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions. We're getting towards the end of the session now. There's still quite a lot of questions left here. We'll get through a couple more, but then the rest we'll have to put onto the website, I think. But there's a question here. Where am I? Yeah, it's about it's from Khadija H. What about alternative feed options for poultry production? And she mentions black soldier fly larvae, for example. Any experiences with that, Joanna, and comments on that?
Yeah, there's certainly research being done, excuse me, in some places on alternative feeds. And I think the problem with that is at the moment is scale. So the feeds that are currently used in commercial systems have been chosen because of their ability to increase growth in chickens rapidly and because of cost. So we're looking at a system that's highly optimized. They want to obtain a balanced commercial ration with as little cost as possible to the producer that will produce the same effects in the chicken. So I think that we do need to be looking at alternative feed sources, and I think that we have a long way to go before we can make things like black soldier fly larvae a viable option for commercial entities. Certainly for smaller like for family poultry or for backyard poultry, certainly these things can develop side by side, and they can provide nutrition options for chickens. So I think there's work to be done, and I think people are already working on this to try and improve the feed situation for commercial chickens. But I think we still have a long way to go.
Okay, thank you. So there's one here which goes back to antimicrobial resistance, and it's from Santosh Kumar Banjara asking about AMR and poultry, what measures to overcome existing policy in India. Bharati, I don't know if you want to say anything. We did have a discussion on this in the series a little while ago with Anita Kotwani, and Vikas Agarwal, but talking about the National Action Plan in India. Have you got any comment on that and how that's going? I mean, I know there is a move towards One Health committees to address antimicrobial resistance in India.
Yeah, there are moves to address that, but I don't think I know enough about it because I have been dealing mostly with human nutrition.
Okay, no worries. But yes, there is a national action plan as far as I understand, but it's the operationalization of that that's really, and getting the different agencies to work together, which is the big challenge really. Okay, I'm going to take one more and it will be a very quick answer, I think. This is another question from Nitish Debnath, who says, do you agree intensive poultry production will ultimately replace all other production systems?
I think that it's going to try. I think that, you know, village or extensive systems, family poultry systems have survived for a very long time, and where there is a need for them, they will continue to exist. So it really depends on the pace and the level of development, I guess, of the country and the food systems. But I think that they will be around for a little while longer, and I think that they are a good source of family food and nutrition security and income, and so they should be supported.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have to bring the discussion to a close now. It's been a really good discussion. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for your very full answers. So I'd like you all to join me in thanking our expert panelists. And they've highlighted a number of key points, which are shown on the slide. So just to emphasize that poultry and other animal source foods provide important nutrients, improve child growth and development. Animal protein intake helps maintain muscle mass in adults, but consumption should be in moderation. Despite increased production, animal source food consumption is very low in vulnerable groups in many low middle income countries. So we need social protection programs to prioritize poultry food due to nutritional and other benefits with equitable access. Trend towards intensification and commercialization is likely to continue as demand increases. Different poultry production systems have different benefits and trade-offs, and a One Health approach to generate, synthesize and publicize data and evidence is required for consumers, producers and policymakers of the future to understand and balance the benefits and trade-offs. Okay, thank you. For you in the audience, we'd quite like you to take part in our second poll, please, which I think will be coming up. So really, as the world moves to implement sustainable food systems, please tick what you think is the most relevant statement. That intensively produced poultry will continue to play an important role because it's affordable by many. A mix of poultry production systems that are well adapted will be important. All food production systems must be better monitored in relation to their safety, or you're not sure which is the most relevant. Thank you. So thanks again to our panelists, Bharati Gulkarni and Joanna Wong, for a great session today. And thanks for the tech team for working in the background to make sure everything goes smoothly. Do please continue your discussions on the Slack channel using the link that you got at registration or from the website whenever you have the time. So the next event in our series is going to be on the 9th of June, and we're continuing to talk about food systems, local or regional or global. The panelists are Sagari Ramdas and Neil Burgess. So I hope you'll all be able to join us then. In the meantime, here's the results of the second poll very quickly. I hope. Yes. Okay. Interesting. So there's definitely a strong feeling in the group that all food production systems must be better moderated in relation to safety, product nutrition profiles and environmental impacts. Thank you very much for that. That's really good. Nothing else to say really, except thanks very much for joining. Stay safe and we hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.